Sarah Chen had been with the agency for 3 years, but she might as well have been invisible. Every morning, she walked into the gleaming headquarters building with her badge and her carefully organized briefcase, ready to prove herself. Every morning, she was met with the same polite indifference that had become as familiar as her own reflection. The conference room was already packed when she arrived for the morning briefing. Sarah slipped into her usual seat near the back, notebook open, pen ready. Director Matthews stood at the front, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit pressed to perfection. Around the table sat the golden team, the agents everyone whispered about in the cafeteria. There was Marcus Reed, the tactical genius who had stopped 3 international incidents before breakfast. Beside him sat Jennifer Kao, the tech specialist, who could hack into any system before her coffee got cold. Then there was Daniel Cross, the smooth talker who could convince a dictator to retire peacefully. Sarah was none of these things. She was support. She was research. She was the person who made sure everyone else had what they needed to shine. Director Matthews clicked the remote and a face appeared on the screen. Sharp features, cold eyes, a scar running down the left cheek. Viktor Volkov, arms dealer, information broker, and one of the most dangerous men in Eastern Europe. Sarah had been tracking his movements for 6 months, piecing together patterns from intercepted communications, financial records, and satellite imagery. She knew his habits better than she knew her own. Marcus leaned forward, his jaw set with determination. Jennifer was already typing on her tablet, pulling up specifications. Daniel cracked his knuckles, a small smile playing at his lips. They were ready. They were always ready. Sarah raised her hand slightly, then lowered it. Nobody was looking her way anyway. The mission briefing lasted an hour. Phase 1 would involve infiltrating Volkov's network through a charity gala in Vienna. Bacchus would provide security oversight. Jennifer would plant surveillance devices. Daniel would make contact with Volkov's inner circle. It was textbook operation planning, the kind of thing the Golden Team did in their sleep. Sarah had prepared a detailed analysis of Volkov's psychological profile, his likely responses to various approaches, and 3 contingency scenarios based on her months of research. The folder sat on the table in front of her, untouched. Director Matthews had already moved on to logistics. After the meeting, Sarah approached Jennifer near the coffee station. They had joined the agency around the same time, had even trained together in the beginning. But somewhere along the way, their paths had diverged sharply. Jennifer looked up from her phone, her expression friendly but distant. It was the look Sarah had grown accustomed to, the one that said, "We're colleagues, not quite friends." Sarah held out the folder. "I put together some analysis on Volkov's behavior patterns. There's a section on his decision-making process under pressure that might be useful for Phase 1. Jennifer took the folder with a polite smile. "Thanks, Sarah. I'll pass it along to the team." She tucked it under her arm without opening it. "We've got most of the intel we need, but every bit helps, right? Every bit helps?" Sarah had heard that phrase so many times it had lost all meaning. It was what people said when they didn't want to hurt your feelings but had no intention of using what you offered. The weeks leading up to Phase 1 were a blur of preparation. Sarah watched from her desk as the Golden Team ran drills, held strategy sessions, and prepared for Vienna. She continued her own work tracking Volkov's communications, noting changes in his security detail, flagging potential complications. She sent her reports up the chain, received polite acknowledgments, and watched as the team proceeded with their original plans. The night before the Vienna operation, Sarah stayed late at the office. The building was quiet, most agents having gone home to rest before the mission launch. She sat in the dim light of her desk lamp, reviewing satellite photos of Volkov's compound outside Prague. Something had been nagging at her for days, a pattern she couldn't quite pin down. Then she saw it. The staff rotations at the compound had changed. New faces in the security detail, all former military, all with specific skill sets. Volkov was expecting something. He was preparing. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up more data. The charity gala in Vienna wasn't the opportunity they thought it was. It was a test. Volkov was checking for surveillance, for infiltration attempts. He was hunting for exactly the kind of operation the agency was about to launch. She drafted an urgent memo and sent it to Director Matthews, copying the entire Phase 1 team. Then she sat back, her heart pounding, and waited. Her phone stayed silent. Her email showed no replies. At midnight, she finally gathered her things and went home, a sick feeling in her stomach. The next evening, she monitored the Vienna operation from the command center. Everything was going according to plan, which somehow made her more nervous. Marcus reported clear security. Jennifer successfully planted 3 listening devices. Daniel made contact with one of Volkov's associates, a minor player named Alexei Kuznetsov. Then, at hour 3 of the operation, everything went sideways. Volkov's security team activated a sophisticated counter-surveillance protocol. Jennifer's devices were located and neutralized within minutes. Alexei Kuznetsov turned out to be a plant, feeding Daniel carefully crafted misinformation. Marcus found himself cut off from the rest of the team as the venue went into lockdown. The Golden Team barely made it out. They returned to headquarters, bruised, frustrated, and empty-handed. Worse, Volkov now knew someone was watching him. He had confirmed his suspicions and would be exponentially harder to approach in the future. The debriefing was tense. Director Matthews was stone-faced as he reviewed what went wrong. Marcus was uncharacteristically quiet. Jennifer kept glancing at her tablet as if the answers might appear there. Daniel looked like he wanted to punch something. Sarah sat in her usual back corner seat. The same memo she had sent, still unread on everyone's devices. Director Matthews dismissed the team, but his voice stopped Sarah as she stood to leave. "Chen, stay behind." The room emptied quickly. Sarah remained standing, her notebook clutched against her chest like a shield. The director studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He pulled out his tablet and opened her memo. "You sent this yesterday." It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. "Yes, sir." The pattern recognition suggested Volkov was anticipating our approach. Matthews was silent for a moment, reading through her analysis. When he looked up, something had shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but something closer to it. Interest, perhaps. "Phase 2 was always going to be more complex," he said finally. "Volkov will be locked down now, paranoid, defensive. We need a different approach entirely, someone he won't see coming." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What did you have in mind, sir?" Director Matthews closed his tablet and looked directly at her. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she had joined the agency. "You've been tracking Volkov for 6 months? You know his patterns, his habits, his psychology. The Golden Team has the skills, but you have the knowledge." He paused. "Phase 2 needs a different kind of leader. Someone who thinks like an analyst, but can operate like an agent." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah's mind was racing, but she kept her voice steady. "Are you offering me Phase 2, sir?" Matthews smiled slightly. It wasn't a warm smile, but it was genuine. "I'm assigning you Phase 2, Agent Chen. You'll have the full resources of the agency, and you'll need them. Volkov is going to ground, and when he surfaces, we'll have one shot at this. Make it count." Sarah left the director's office in a daze. 3 years of being backup, of being the person in the corner, of having her work acknowledged but not valued, and now this. She should have felt triumph, vindication, excitement instead. She felt the weight of every eye in the building watching her as word spread. The backup had been given the mission that the Golden Team couldn't complete. Sar Chen, the analyst, who everyone ignored, was now leading the most critical phase of the agency's highest priority operation. She went to her desk and opened her files on Volkov. There was so much work to do, so many angles to consider. But as she dove into the data, a small smile crossed her face. They had treated her like backup. Oh no. They would see what she could really do. Asterisk, the morning after Sarah received her assignment, the atmosphere in the headquarters had shifted. People who normally walked past her desk without a glance now offered tight smiles or curious looks. The backup agent was suddenly the center of attention, and not everyone was happy about it. Sarah arrived early, as she always did, but this time her desk felt different. It was still the same corner workspace with the slightly wobbly chair and the view of the parking lot, but now it represented something more. It was the command center. For Phase 2, whether anyone else believed it or not, Marcus Reed was the first to appear at her desk. He stood there for a moment, his expression carefully neutral, before clearing his throat. Sarah looked up from her screen, where she had been reviewing security footage from Volkov's last known location. "Chen," he said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't quite place. Not hostility, but not warmth either. "Director Matthews says I'm assigned to your operation." Your operation. The words hung awkwardly between them. Marcus had led dozens of successful missions. He was a legend in the field, the kind of agent they wrote training manuals about. Now he was reporting to the analyst who had spent 3 years making copies of mission reports and flagging potential surveillance targets. Sarah stood, meeting his eyes. She was shorter than him by half a foot, but she kept her spine straight. "I'm glad to have you on the team, Agent Reed. Your tactical expertise will be crucial for what we're planning." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Surprise, maybe, that she wasn't apologizing for her new role or downplaying her authority. He nodded once, a sharp military gesture. "What do you need from me?" Before Sarah could answer, Jennifer appeared, her tablet tucked under one arm. Behind her came Daniel, looking less composed than usual. The Golden Team was assembled, but the hierarchy had been turned upside down. Sarah gestured to the small conference room adjacent to her workspace. "Let's talk in private." Once they were seated, Sarah pulled up a holographic display from her tablet. Volkov's compound appeared in 3 dimensions, rotating slowly. Around it, she had mapped out guard rotations, security systems, supply deliveries, and communication patterns. "Phase 1 taught us something valuable," Sarah began. "Volkov is paranoid, yes, but his paranoia follows patterns. He expects infiltration from the outside, from people trying to get close to him. That's what he was testing in Vienna." Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So what's your brilliant plan? If we can't get close to him, how do we run the operation?" Sarah met his skeptical gaze without flinching. "We don't get close to him. We make him come to us." She expanded the display, showing a network of financial transactions. "For 6 months, I've been tracking Volkov's money. He's not just an arms dealer, he's an investor. He has legitimate businesses, shell companies, real estate holdings across 3 continents. And right now, he's trying to acquire a telecommunications company in Singapore." Jennifer leaned forward, her interest piqued despite herself. "Why does an arms dealer want a telecom company?" "Control," Sarah said simply. "Secure communications, encrypted networks, the ability to move information without government oversight. It's worth billions to someone in his position." She pulled up another file. "The company is called Pacific Com Solutions. The board is divided on whether to accept Volkov's offer. 3 board members are in favor, 4 are against. The deciding vote belongs to the chairman, David Huang." Marcus was studying the display intently now. "You want to get to Volkov through the acquisition?" "Better than that," Sarah said. "I want to control the acquisition." David Huang is cautious, conservative. He doesn't want to sell to someone with Volkov's reputation, but he's being pressured by shareholders. If we can give him a reason to reject the deal, Volkov will be forced to negotiate personally, and when he does, we'll be ready. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, but the execution would be anything but simple. Over the next 3 days, Sarah's team worked around the clock. She assigned Jennifer to dig deeper into Pacific Com's infrastructure, looking for leverage points. Marcus began planning security protocols for when they made contact with Volkov. Daniel researched the other board members, looking for weaknesses and alliances. Sarah herself focused on David Huang. She learned everything about him, from his morning coffee order to his daughter's university schedule. She wasn't looking for blackmail material, she was looking for understanding. What motivated him? What did he fear? What did he value? The answer came from an unexpected source. Huang's younger brother had died in a military operation gone wrong, a casualty of faulty intelligence provided by a corrupt arms dealer. It was years ago, buried in public records, but it was there. Huang would never knowingly do business with someone like Volkov if he understood who he was dealing with. Sarah drafted a detailed dossier on Volkov's operations, focusing on the human cost of his business. Then she did something that made Marcus nearly have a heart attack when he found out. She sent it directly to David Huang's personal email, anonymously. With a simple subject line, "Know who you're dealing with. You did what?" Marcus's voice was tight with controlled anger. "You made contact without clearance, without backup protocols, without asking permission from someone who would have said no," Sarah finished calmly. Huang needed to know the truth. Now he does. What if he traces it back to us? He won't. Jennifer routed it through 17 proxy servers in 3 different continents. As far as anyone can tell, it came from a concerned citizen who happened to have access to classified intelligence. Sarah met his eyes. Sometimes the right move isn't the safe move, Agent Reed. For a long moment, Marcus just stared at her. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, but genuine. "You've got guts, Chen. I'll give you that." The dossier had its intended effect. 3 days later, David Huang held a press conference announcing that Pacific Com Solutions would not be accepting any offers at this time. The board needed more time to consider their options and ensure any potential buyer aligned with the company's values. Volkov's response was immediate. He requested a face-to-face meeting with Huang, offering to address any concerns personally. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later in Zurich, neutral ground where both parties could feel secure. Except Sarah had no intention of letting it be secure for Volkov. The preparation for Zurich was intense. Sarah worked 18-hour days, reviewing every detail, anticipating every possible complication. She had Daniel practice his cover as Huang's new security consultant. Brought in after the anonymous dossier raised concerns, Jennifer would be embedded in the hotel's technical staff, giving them eyes and ears throughout the building. Marcus would coordinate external security, ready to extract the team if things went wrong. And Sarah herself would be there, not as an agent, but as Huang's executive assistant. It was a risk, putting herself in the field when she had minimal operational training. But she was the one who understood Volkov's psychology. She was the one who could read his tells, anticipate his moves. The night before they left for Zurich, Sarah found herself alone in the office again. She stood at the window, looking out at the city lights, thinking about how far she had come in just a few weeks. From backup to mission leader, from invisible to indispensable. Her phone buzzed. A message from Director Matthews: "Don't try to prove yourself. Just succeed." Sarah smiled slightly. She typed back, "Understood." But as she packed up her desk and headed home to catch a few hours of sleep, she knew that success and proving herself were the same thing now. The Golden Team was watching, waiting to see if the backup could deliver. The agency was watching, wondering if Matthews had made a mistake. And somewhere in Europe, Viktor Volkov was preparing for a business meeting, completely unaware that he was walking into a trap designed by someone he had never heard of. The flight to Zurich was quiet. The team traveled separately, meeting at a safe house on the outskirts of the city. Sarah reviewed the plan one more time with each of them, checking and rechecking every detail. Marcus watched her with an expression that had evolved from skepticism to something closer to respect. Jennifer actually asked for her opinion on technical placement. Even Daniel had stopped making snide comments about analysts playing agent. They weren't quite a team yet, but they were getting there. The morning of the meeting, Sarah dressed in a conservative business suit and pulled her hair back into a neat bun. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. She looked professional, confident, capable. She looked like someone who belonged in the room where critical decisions were made. The question was whether she could actually deliver on that appearance. In a few hours, she would be face to face with one of the most dangerous men in the intelligence community. Everything she had worked for, everything she had proved, came down to this moment. Sarah took a deep breath, picked up her briefcase, and headed for the door. The backup was about to take the lead, and there was no turning back now. The Hotel Schweizerhof was exactly the kind of establishment where powerful people met to discuss questionable deals. All marble floors and crystal chandeliers, with staff trained to see nothing and remember less. Sarah walked through the lobby with her briefcase, her heels clicking against the polished stone. Playing the role of efficient assistant to perfection, David. Huang was already in the private conference room on the third floor, reviewing documents at a mahogany table that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, silver threading through his dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. When Sarah entered, he looked up with the mildly distracted expression of someone whose mind was elsewhere. "Miss Chen," he said, using the cover name they had agreed upon. "Everything is prepared?" Sarah nodded, setting her briefcase on the side table. Inside was everything she needed for the operation, carefully disguised as business documents and office supplies. Mr. Volkov's team confirmed he will arrive in 15 minutes. Security swept the room twice. "We're clear." What she didn't say was that Jennifer's sweeps had found 3 listening devices planted by Volkov's advance team. They had left them in place, but modified them to transmit exactly what Sarah wanted Volkov to hear. In the intelligence game, sometimes the best move was letting your opponent think they had the advantage. Daniel entered next, playing his role as the serious security consultant. He did a show of checking the room, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. To anyone watching, he was exactly what he appeared to be. Only Sarah caught the subtle hand signal that meant Marcus was in position outside, and Jennifer had confirmed all surveillance feeds were under their control. The knock on the door came precisely on time. Volkov was nothing if not punctual. Sarah opened the door, and there he was. Viktor Volkov, in person, was somehow both more and less intimidating than his photograph suggested. He was tall, well-dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than a car. The scar on his cheek was less prominent in person, just a thin line that caught the light. But his eyes were exactly as cold as she had imagined, calculating and assessing everything in the room within seconds. Behind him stood 2 bodyguards, both former special forces, if Sarah's research was correct. They took positions flanking the door as Volkov entered, their eyes constantly moving, evaluating threats. "Mr. Huang," Volkov said, his accent thick but his English perfect. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I understand you have concerns about our potential partnership." Huang stood, extending his hand. "Mr. Volkov, please, sit. Can we offer you coffee?" While they went through the pleasantries, Sarah played her role perfectly. She was the invisible assistant, preparing beverages, arranging papers, existing in the background. Volkov's eyes passed over her once, dismissed her as irrelevant, and never returned. It was exactly what she had counted on. Men like Volkov never saw the assistants, the support staff, the people who made things run. They were too busy watching for threats from other powerful men, for betrayal from their own ranks. They never thought the greatest danger might come from someone they considered beneath notice. The conversation began cordially enough. Volkov spoke about his vision for Pacificom, how the acquisition would benefit all parties involved. He was smooth, persuasive, the kind of man who could sell sand in a desert. Huang listened politely, occasionally glancing at Sarah as if checking details, which was their signal that he was following the script they had prepared. Then Huang leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Volkov, I received some disturbing information about your business operations. Information that suggests your interests might not align with our company's values." Something flickered across Volkov's face. Just for a moment, the mask slipped, and Sarah saw the dangerous man underneath the polished exterior. Then it was gone, replaced by a look of concerned confusion. "Disturbing information. Mr. Huang, I assure you my business dealings are entirely legitimate." "If someone has been spreading rumors," "Not rumors," Huang interrupted, and there was steel in his voice now. "Documentation. Records of weapons sales to conflict zones, connections to groups that have destabilized entire regions. The death toll associated with your business is considerable, Mr. Volkov." Volkov's expression hardened. "I deal in security solutions. What my clients do with those solutions is not my concern. This is simply business, Mr. Huang. Surely you understand that." "My brother died because of men like you," Huang said quietly. "Men who sold weapons to the highest bidder, without caring about the consequences. So no, Mr. Volkov, I don't understand that kind of business at all." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Volkov's bodyguard shifted slightly, hands moving closer to concealed weapons. Daniel tensed, ready to move. Sarah remained perfectly still, her hand near the briefcase where her own weapon was hidden. Volkov stood slowly. I see this meeting was a waste of time. Someone has poisoned you against me, Mr. Huang. That's unfortunate. His eyes swept the room again, and this time they lingered on Sarah for a moment longer. Very unfortunate. I think we're done here, Huang said, also standing. Thank you for coming, Mr. Volkov, but Pacificcom will be looking elsewhere for investors. For a moment, Sarah thought Volkov might do something rash. His hand twitched toward his jacket. The bodyguards were definitely reaching for weapons now. Daniel was moving, putting himself between Huang and the threat. Then Volkov smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Of course, he said smoothly. Business is business. No hard feelings, Mr. Huang? He turned toward the door, then paused. Though I wonder who gave you that information. Someone with access to very sensitive intelligence. Yes. Someone with resources beyond a simple businessman. He was fishing, trying to confirm his suspicions that a government agency was involved. Sarah knew this was a critical moment. If Volkov became convinced he was being targeted by intelligence services, he would disappear so deep underground they might never find him again. Sarah did something that made Marcus's voice crackle urgently in her hidden earpiece. She spoke up. Mr. Wong received the information from a journalist, she said, her voice carrying just the right note of nervous efficiency. A freelance investigator who has been tracking illegal arms sales in Eastern Europe. He sent similar dossiers to several of Pacificcom's board members. All eyes turned to her. Volkov's gaze was suddenly sharp, focused. Sarah made herself fidget slightly with the papers in her hands, playing the role of an assistant who had spoken out of turn. A journalist, Volkov repeated slowly. He took a step toward Sarah. And you know this, how? I helped Mr. Huang research the source, Sarah said, keeping her eyes down in a show of deference. The man's name is Thomas Brennan. He works for several European publications. I can provide his contact information if you'd like to verify. That won't be necessary, Volkov said, but Sarah could see his mind working. Thomas Brennan was real, a journalist who actually was investigating arms dealers. Sarah had studied his work, knew his style. It was plausible enough that Volkov might accept it. The moment stretched out. Then Volkov nodded curtly and left, his bodyguards falling in behind him. The door closed with a soft click. Nobody moved for a full 10 seconds. Then Daniel let out a long breath. That was insane, he said. You just made yourself a target. She gave us what we needed, Huang said quietly. He wasn't really David Huang, of course. He was Agent Michael Torres, 15 years in deep cover operations, brought in specifically for this role. Volkov believes the leak came from outside intelligence channels. He'll waste resources tracking down Brennan instead of going to ground. Sarah's hands were shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. She sat down in one of the conference room chairs, feeling suddenly exhausted. Did Jennifer get what she needed? Marcus's voice came through the earpiece. Affirmative. While you had Volkov's attention, Jennifer cloned his phone and 2 of his security team's devices. We have access to his entire communication network. In the intelligence business, that was better than gold. With access to Volkov's communications, they could track his movements, monitor his deals, identify his associates. Phase 2 wasn't just about stopping one arms dealer. It was about dismantling his entire network. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the reality sink in. They had done it. The plan had worked. Volkov had walked into the trap, and now they had him. When she opened her eyes, Torres was looking at her with something like respect. That was good work, Agent Chen. Quick thinking with the journalist angle. It was calculated, Sarah said, her voice steadier now. Volkov needed an explanation he could accept, something that fit his worldview. Journalists investigating arms dealers make sense to him. Government agents running complex operations don't fit the profile of what just happened in this room. Daniel shook his head, a slight smile on his face. I thought analysts were supposed to avoid improvisation. Analysts know when improvisation is necessary, Sarah replied. We just prefer to have contingency plans for our contingencies. Over the next few hours, they extracted from Zurich exactly as planned. Volkov's team was following them, of course, but that was expected. Marcus had prepared 3 different exit routes, and they used all of them, splitting up and reconvening at different locations to confuse surveillance. By the time Sarah boarded the private plane back to headquarters, she was running on pure adrenaline. Jennifer was already reviewing the data from Volkov's phone, her eyes wide with excitement. This is incredible. He's got connections to networks we didn't even know existed. Military contractors, government officials, intelligence officers from at least 6 different countries. How long to map it all out? Sarah asked. Weeks, maybe months. But we've got leverage now. Real leverage. Jennifer looked up from her screen. You know, when they assigned you to Phase 2, I thought Matthews had lost his mind. I was wrong. This is brilliant. Coming from Jennifer, that was high praise. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. The validation she had been seeking for 3 years, finally materializing. But she kept her voice professional. We're not done yet. Volkov is going to realize eventually that something went wrong in Zurich. We need to move quickly. Marcus appeared in the aisle, dropping into the seat across from Sarah. He was still in tactical mode, alert and focused despite the long day. Director Matthews wants a full debriefing as soon as we land. He's pulling in the counterterrorism task force. Whatever you found on that phone, it's bigger than just Volkov. Sarah nodded. She had suspected as much. Men like Volkov didn't operate in isolation. They were part of vast networks, shadow economies that funded conflicts and destabilized regions. Phase 2 was just the beginning. As the plane lifted off, Sarah looked out the window at Zurich falling away beneath them. Somewhere down there, Viktor Volkov was probably just realizing that the business meeting had gone wrong in ways he didn't yet understand. He thought he had been rejected by a cautious businessman. He didn't know he had been outmaneuvered by the analyst everyone had treated like backup. The Golden Team was sleeping now, exhausted from the operation, but Sarah's mind was still racing, already planning the next phase. Anticipating Volkov's moves, calculating probabilities. This was what she was good at, seeing patterns where others saw chaos, finding connections in seemingly random data. They had treated her like backup for 3 years. Now, they had seen what she could do when given the chance. But Sarah knew better than to get complacent. The real work was just beginning, and Volkov was still out there, dangerous and unpredictable. Phase 2 was complete, but the mission was far from over. The weeks following, Zurich were unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her 3 years at the agency. Her small corner desk had been replaced with an actual office, though she barely used it. Most of her time was spent in the operations center, a secure room 3 floors underground where dozens of analysts and agents worked around the clock to dismantle Volkov's network. The data from Jennifer's phone cloning had proven even more valuable than they had initially realized. Volkov's communications revealed connections to arms smuggling rings in 7 countries, corrupt officials in 4 governments, and 3 separate terrorist organizations. It was a web of illegal activity so vast that Director Matthews had escalated it to the highest levels of government. Sarah stood before a massive digital wall displaying the network they had mapped. Red lines connected known associates, blue lines indicated financial transactions. Yellow lines showed communication patterns. At the center of it all was Viktor Volkov, the spider at the heart of a very dangerous web. Marcus stood beside her, arms crossed, studying the display. Over the past weeks, his attitude toward Sarah had completely transformed. He no longer questioned her decisions or second-guessed her analysis. He had learned what the rest of the team was learning, that Sarah's 3 years in the background had made her uniquely qualified for this kind of operation. She saw things others missed because she had spent so long watching from the sidelines. We've identified 18 priority targets, Marcus said, pointing to various nodes on the network. If we hit them simultaneously, we can cripple his operation before he has time to adapt. Sarah shook her head. Simultaneous strikes are too risky. Volkov has contingency plans, deadman switches, insurance policies. The moment we move on one target, the others will scatter. She zoomed in on a particular section of the network. We need to be surgical, calculated. We take them down in sequence, making each move look like unrelated incidents. Jennifer appeared at Sarah's other side, tablet in hand. "I've been analyzing Volkov's communication patterns. He's paranoid, but predictable. He checks in with his key people at specific times, using rotating encryption. If we time our moves for the gaps between his check-ins, we can take down multiple targets before he realizes there's a coordinated effort." "How long are those gaps?" Sarah asked. "Anywhere from 6 to 12 hours, depending on time zones and his travel schedule." Jennifer pulled up a timeline. "But if we're smart about it, we can create artificial gaps by disrupting his communications at strategic points." Daniel joined the group, looking more energized than Sarah had ever seen him. The operation had awakened something in all of them, a sense of purpose that went beyond typical missions. They weren't just following orders anymore. They were dismantling something genuinely dangerous, and they all felt the weight of that responsibility. "I've been working on the diplomatic angle," Daniel said. "3 of Volkov's key contacts are government officials who think they're untouchable. But if we can prove their connections to illegal arms sales, their own governments will be forced to act. We don't even need to arrest them, just expose them." Sarah considered this, her mind running through scenarios and complications. Exposure is a weapon, but it's also irreversible. Once we reveal these connections, Volkov will know we have comprehensive intelligence on his network. He'll adapt. "So we save the exposures for the endgame," Marcus suggested. "Use them as the final strike when we're ready to take Volkov himself." Sarah nodded slowly. "We need to think of this in phases. Not phase 1 and phase 2, but multiple smaller phases, each designed to weaken a specific aspect of his network. Financial first, cutting off his money. Then logistical, disrupting his supply chains. Then communications, isolating him from his people. And finally, legal and diplomatic, closing every escape route. Over the next 3 months, they executed the plan with precision that even Director Matthews found impressive. The financial phase involved working with international banking regulators to freeze accounts and trace shell companies. Jennifer's technical expertise proved invaluable as she tracked cryptocurrency transactions and uncovered hidden assets. They seized over $200 million in the first month alone. The logistical phase was trickier. Volkov's weapons moved through a complex network of shipping companies, cargo facilities, and border crossings. Sarah coordinated with agencies in 12 different countries, providing intelligence that allowed them to intercept shipments without revealing the full scope of the operation. To Volkov, it looked like bad luck and increased security, not a coordinated takedown. Through it all, Sarah monitored Volkov's behavior, watching for signs that he was catching on. The man was smart, dangerously so. She could see him becoming more cautious, more paranoid. He changed his communication protocols 3 times. He moved his base of operations twice. He cut ties with associates he deemed too risky. But Sarah had spent 6 months studying this man before Phase 2 even began. She knew how he thought, how he reacted to pressure. She knew he would become more isolated as he felt threatened, which was exactly what they needed. An isolated Volkov was a vulnerable Volkov. The turning point came in the 4th month. One of Volkov's top lieutenants, a man named Dmitry Petrov, was arrested in Istanbul with evidence linking him to a bombing that had killed 32 people. Petrov was facing life in prison, and he knew it. Marcus and Sarah flew to Istanbul to oversee the interrogation personally. Petrov was a hard man, scarred and dangerous even in handcuffs. But he was also smart enough to know when the game was over. Sarah sat across from him in the interrogation room, a folder of evidence between them. "You're looking at spending the rest of your life in a Turkish prison. The conditions there are not pleasant, as I'm sure you know." Petrov stared at her with cold eyes. "I have nothing to say." "That's fine. We have enough evidence to convict you 3 times over. But I thought you might be interested in an alternative." Sarah opened the folder, showing him photos of Volkov meeting with another associate, someone younger, ambitious. "Victor is already replacing you. This man is Alexei Sokolov. He's been angling for your position for months. The moment you were arrested, Volkov gave him your responsibilities, your contacts, your operations." Something flickered in Petrov's eyes. Anger, betrayal, It's the recognition of a truth he had probably suspected but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Loyalty is a beautiful thing, Mr. Petrov, but it only works when it goes both ways. Viktor Volkov has survived this long because he always puts himself first. His people are tools to him, nothing more. And when a tool breaks, he replaces it. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. By the end, Petrov had given them everything. Safe house locations, weapons cache coordinates, communication protocols, financial contacts. Most importantly, he gave them Volkov's planned movements for the next month. The man was scheduled to attend a private auction in Morocco, a gathering of wealthy buyers looking for specialized military equipment. Sarah and her team had 2 weeks to prepare. They couldn't simply arrest Volkov at the auction. That would tip off dozens of other criminals and blow the entire operation. They needed to catch him away from his security, in a moment of vulnerability. The auction was just the lure. The real trap would come after. Jennifer worked her technical magic, hacking into the auction house's systems and planting surveillance throughout the facility. Marcus coordinated with Moroccan authorities, who were more than happy to assist in taking down an international arms dealer. Daniel created a cover identity as a buyer, someone with enough money and questionable connections to be interesting to Volkov. And Sarah orchestrated it all, seeing the big picture while managing every small detail. She had learned something crucial over these months. Being a good analyst wasn't just about understanding data. It was about understanding people, their motivations and fears, and the patterns of behavior that made them predictable. Volkov was predictable. He just didn't know it yet. The night of the auction, Sarah watched from a mobile command center parked 3 blocks away. Multiple screens showed different angles of the auction house, tracking Volkov's movements and those of his security team. The man looked confident, relaxed even, surrounded by his people and his power. He had no idea that every person he trusted had been compromised, that his communications were being monitored in real time, that his escape routes had been quietly blocked. He thought he was attending a business transaction. He was actually walking into the culmination of 6 months of the most precise intelligence operation Sarah had ever been part of. Daniel made contact during the auction's intermission, engaging Volkov in conversation about a fictional shipment of anti-aircraft weapons. Volkov was interested, as Sarah had known he would be. He suggested they continue the discussion over dinner after the auction at a restaurant he knew well. The restaurant was perfect for their purposes. Small, exclusive, with a private room. In the back, that Volkov favored for sensitive business discussions, Marcus's team was already in position, dressed as staff and other patrons. Jennifer had control of all electronic devices in the building. Sarah herself was at a table near the entrance, dressed elegantly, looking like just another wealthy patron enjoying an expensive meal. When Volkov arrived with his security detail, Sarah's heart rate increased despite her training. This was it. The moment everything came together or fell apart. The man walked past her table without a glance, heading toward the private room where Daniel was waiting. Sarah gave them 10 minutes to settle in. Then she stood, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the private room. One of Volkov's bodyguards moved to block her path. "Private party," he said in accented English. Sarah smiled apologetically. "I'm so sorry. I was told this was the restroom." It was a deliberately foolish mistake, the kind of thing that made her seem harmless. The bodyguard started to direct her away, but before he could finish speaking, Marcus's team moved. It was over in seconds. The bodyguards were disarmed and subdued before they could react. Volkov jumped to his feet, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Daniel had already secured it. More agents poured into the room, weapons drawn, surrounding him completely. Viktor Volkov, one of the most dangerous arms dealers in the world, stood in the center of the room with nowhere to run. His cold eyes swept across the agents, landing finally on Sarah as she stepped through the doorway. Recognition dawned slowly. "You," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "The assistant from Zurich." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Agent Sarah Chen. Actually, you really should pay more attention to the people you dismiss as irrelevant, Mr. Volkov." For a moment she saw something in his expression. Respect, perhaps? Or maybe just the acknowledgement of a worthy opponent. Then his face hardened into a mask of cold rage. You've been hunting me this whole time? Since before Vienna. Since 6 months before Vienna, Sarah corrected. Every move you made, every decision, every paranoid security measure, I predicted them all. Because I studied you, Mr. Volkov. I learned how you think, how you operate. You were looking for threats from equals, from other powerful players. You never thought to look at the backup. The arrest was clean, professional, without incident. Moroccan authorities took official custody, while agency personnel ensured the intelligence gathered would be preserved for prosecution. Volkov's entire network, already weakened by months of surgical strikes, began to collapse completely with the news of his capture. The flight back to headquarters was quiet. Sarah sat by herself, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic, feeling the exhaustion of months of intense work finally catching up with her. They had done it, not just Phase 2, but the entire mission. Volkov was in custody, his network dismantled, and dozens of dangerous criminals were either arrested or exposed. Marcus sat down beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without speaking, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. You know, he finally said, when Matthews first assigned you to Phase 2, I thought it was a mistake. Thought he was being soft, giving the analyst a chance to play agent. I was wrong. Sarah smiled slightly. I was always an agent, Marcus. I just operated differently than you were used to. That's what makes you dangerous, he replied, a note of admiration in his voice. People like Volkov, they expect agents to come at them directly with force and tactics. They don't expect someone to quietly study them for months, learn every detail of their life, and then dismantle everything they've built, piece by piece. That's a different kind of warfare. It's the only kind I know how to fight, Sarah said. 3 years as backup taught me patience, taught me to watch, to wait, to see the patterns. Everyone thought I was being overlooked, but I was learning. When they landed, Director Matthews was waiting on the tarmac. It was unusual for him to meet agents personally, but this had been an unusual operation. He shook Sarah's hand with a firm grip, his expression serious but satisfied. Exceptional work, Agent Chen. The intelligence you gathered will have implications for years. We've already identified 3 other major networks with connections to Volkov. Your analysis is being used to plan operations in 8 different countries. Sarah felt a swell of pride but kept her voice professional. Thank you, sir. The team performed brilliantly. I couldn't have done it without them, Funny Matthews said with a slight smile. They all said the same thing about you. Over the following weeks, Sarah watched as the full impact of the operation became clear. Arrests were made across 3 continents. Weapon shipments worth billions were seized. 3 separate terrorist plots were disrupted using intelligence from Volkov's communications. The work she had done, the plan she had executed, had saved lives. Possibly thousands of lives. But what meant the most to Sarah happened on a regular Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Volkov's arrest. She was working at her desk, now a proper desk and a proper office with her name on the door, when Jennifer stopped by. Hey, Jennifer said, leaning against the doorframe. A bunch of us are going out tonight to celebrate. Nothing formal, just drinks and unwinding. You should come. It was such a simple invitation, but it represented something profound. Sarah was no longer the backup, the forgotten analyst, the person in the corner. She was part of the team, respected and valued. They didn't just want her tactical mind anymore. They wanted her company. I'd like that, Sarah said with a genuine smile. Text me the details. That evening, as Sarah left the office, she passed the conference room where she had spent 3 years sitting in the back corner, watching the golden team receive their assignments. She paused for a moment, remembering that version of herself. The one who had been treated like backup, who had doubted whether she would ever get the chance to prove what she could do. That woman felt like a different person now. She had taken the assignment everyone thought would fail, had faced down one of the most dangerous criminals in the intelligence community, and had emerged victorious. Not through force or aggression, but through patience, understanding, and the kind of strategic thinking that came from years of watching and learning. Sarah Chen had been the backup. But she had never been backup material. She had just been waiting for her moment, studying the game while everyone else was playing it. And when that moment finally came, she had been ready. The light in the conference room flickered off as she walked past. Sarah didn't look back. She had spent enough time in that room, in that role, in that version of herself. Now she had her own office, her own team, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had earned every bit of it. They had treated her like backup. She had taught them that backup could become the most valuable player in the game. And somewhere in a maximum security facility, Viktor Volkov was probably still trying to figure out how an assistant from a business meeting had dismantled everything he had built. Sarah smiled to herself as she headed out into the evening. Some lessons, she thought, were learned the hard way, and some teachers were found in the most unexpected places, like the quiet analyst in the corner who everyone overlooked. Until they couldn't overlook her anymore.